Hello, welcome to my channel. Today the rain over Blackthorn Ridge was not the gentle, forgiving kind. It fell in iron sheets, drumming a frantic, arrhythmic beat against the tin roof of Dylan Marsh's workshop. For 3 days the storm had isolated him. No power, no signal, just the guttering flame of a kerosene lamp and the ghosts of a past he thought he had drowned in cheap whiskey and good intentions. Dylan was not a bad man, but he was a tired one. At 47, his hands were maps of scars earned in a trade he'd abandoned, smuggling relics across the fractured borderlands of the old world. Now he carved wooden birds, decoys, whimsical things with glass eyes that reflected the firelight. He lived alone in a cabin that smelled of cedar shavings and regret, convinced that obscurity was the same as redemption. That illusion shattered when the knock came. It was not a polite rap. It was a slow, deliberate thud, 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 thud. 3 strikes that resonated not against the wood of the door, but against the marrow of his bones. The lamp flickered. The rain seemed to hold its breath. Dylan's first instinct was survival. He reached for the rusted revolver under the workbench, a habit from his smuggling days. But as his fingers brushed the cold steel, a voice, smooth as polished stone and sharp as a shard of flint, seeped through the cracks in the doorframe. "Dylan, put the gun down. You know it won't change what's already written." The voice was familiar, and that familiarity was terrifying. He knew her before he saw her. Salome. 6 years, 4 months, and 11 days since he'd last heard that voice. She had been a myth among smugglers, a fixer, a ferryman of fates, a woman who moved through the chaos like a shark through dark water. In the old days, she was the one you called when cargo was too hot, the debt was too deep, or a life needed to disappear. She never wrote anything down. She never made promises. She only collected. His hand left the revolver. Bob's the point. Salome wouldn't knock if she intended to kill him. A bullet would be a mercy, and mercy was not her currency. He unlatched the deadbolt. The door swung inward on a gust of wet, pine-scented air. She stood silhouetted against the storm, water sheeting off the brim of a black felt hat. She wore a long coat, the kind patched with modern ballistic weave but cut like something from a bygone century. Her face was unchanged. Ageless, severe, with cheekbones that could cut glass and eyes the color of a frozen lake. Behind her, a sleek, dark vehicle hummed silently on the muddy track, its outline blurred by rain. "You look old, Dylan," she said, stepping inside without invitation. Her boots left no mud on his floorboards. "And you smell like sawdust and fear." "Salome," he breathed. The name felt like swallowing gravel. I heard you were dead." "You heard wrong." She removed her hat, shaking water into the hearth where no fire burned. "You heard what I wanted you to hear, or rather, what I needed you to not think about." She moved through his cabin like a curator in a museum of failure. Her fingers trailed over a half-carved heron, a stack of unpaid bills, a photograph of a woman, his late wife. Mara turned face down. She turned it upright, studied it. Her expression did not change. "You've been hiding," she said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation, clinical and cold. 1,700 miles from the nearest border crossing. No phone, no bank account. You trade carvings for venison and firewood. You think the world forgot you. Dylan closed the door. The wind howled, but inside the air grew still, heavy with unspoken arithmetic. "I didn't think," he said carefully. "I hoped." Hope is a debtor's favorite anesthetic. She turned to face him fully. The lamplight caught her left hand, and there was a thin silver ring on her index finger, unadorned except for a single microscopic etching. A labyrinth. Their old symbol. A deal that had no exit. "Do you remember the night in Port Rosso, the fire at the docks?" Dylan's stomach turned to ice. Of course he remembered. It was the night that had ended his smuggling career. The night he'd burned a bridge literally to save his own skin. But that wasn't what Salome was referring to. She was referring to the favor. "I pulled you out of the wreckage," she continued, her voice dropping to a murmur that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his spine. The warehouse was collapsing. The authorities had you cornered. You had a satchel full of uncut stones that didn't belong to you, and a bullet in your thigh. I could have left you. I should have left you, but I didn't. And I paid you, Dylan said, though his voice cracked. I gave you half the stones. You gave me a stone, Salome corrected. She pulled a chair from his rough-hewn table, turned it backward and straddled it, folding her arms over the top. A single, flawed diamond. The rest you pawned to start this quaint little purgatory. No, Dylan. The payment for that night was never financial. It was existential. She leaned forward. Her frozen eyes thawed just enough to reveal something underneath, not warmth but purpose. A terrible, patient gravity. That night, as the roof caved in and I dragged your bleeding body through a sewer grate, you didn't thank me with money. You made a vow. You said, Salome, name your price. Anything. Anything at all. My life is yours. Do you remember? Dylan's throat went dry. He remembered. He remembered the blood loss, the adrenaline, the raw terror. He remembered grasping her coat like a drowning man grasps a spar. And he remembered the words. He had spoken them not as a contract but as a prayer. But Salome was not a deity. She was a ledger. And in her world, prayers were just verbal ayahs with compound interest. I was out of my mind, he whispered. You were out of options, she said without a trace of malice. The terms were clear. Your life for my intervention. I intervened. And now, 6 years later, I'm here to collect. The silence that followed was not empty. It was packed tight with the weight of every peaceful morning he'd stolen. Every sunset he'd watched from his porch, every wooden bird he'd carved, believing that the past was a country he'd successfully emigrated from. What do you want? The words came out flat, resigned. Salome smiled. It was not a pleasant sight like watching a glacier crack. Not what you think. I don't want your money. I don't want you to kill anyone. I don't even want you to leave this cabin, not permanently. She paused, letting the rain hammer the roof as a form of percussion. I want you to carve a single specific bird, not for sale, not for display, for delivery. Dylan blinked. Of all the things he'd imagined, a heist, a forgery, a final bloody errand, this was not among them. A bird? You came through a hurricane to threaten me over a decoy? Not a decoy, she said, and her voice lost the last vestige of humor. A vessel. Inside one of your hollow carvings, the kind you make for hiding things, don't pretend you don't, you will place a small object. I will give you a key no larger than your thumbnail. You will seal the bird, paint it, and deliver it to a man who drinks black coffee every Tuesday at a diner called the Rusty Spoon, 200 miles north of here. You'll set it on his table, say nothing, and walk away. That's it? Dylan asked, suspicious. That's the first part, Salome said. The favor is that you do not ask what the key opens or who the man is or why I cannot deliver it myself. The favor is that you trust me, the way I trusted you when I pulled you from that fire. The favor is that your life which you pledged to me belongs to me for exactly 72 hours. After that you are free. The debt is void. It sounded too simple. In Dylan's experience, simplicity was the most elaborate trap of all. And if I refuse? Salome stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. She walked to his workbench and picked up a finished carving, a mallard, beautifully detailed, its wings slightly lifted in mid-flight. She turned it over in her hands, admiring the craftsmanship. Then she set it down gently and looked at him. If you refuse, I don't kill you, Dylan. I don't hurt you. I merely rescind my intervention. Her voice was quiet now, almost gentle. Do you remember the men who were chasing you in Port Rosso? The ones whose warehouse you set ablaze? They're still alive. They still have long memories. And I have been the only thing standing between you and their attention for 6 years. The moment you say no, that protection evaporates. You'll have about a week before the first inquiry. 2 weeks before the first knock on that door, and it won't be a polite one. Dylan felt the blood drain from his face. He had not known. He had convinced himself that the fire had erased all evidence, that the borderlands had swallowed his trail, that his obscurity was organic. But obscurity, he realized, had been a paid service, and the subscription was about to lapse. "You've been my shadow," he said. "Not a question." "I've been your guardian angel," Salome corrected, "with a very expensive fee structure, but I'm not a monster." Complete a simple courier job, one last use of the skills you pretend you've forgotten, and you walk free. Clean slate, no more watching over your shoulder, no more nightmares about the fire. Or I refuse and you unleash hell. She tilted her head as if considering the phrasing. I don't unleash anything. I simply stop holding it back. There's a difference. She walked to the door and opened it. The storm had softened to a drizzle. The sky was the color of a bruise. You have until tomorrow night. The key is outside, under your welcome mat. It's a mat that says, welcome. I always found that ironic, given how unwelcoming you are. She stepped into the damp air. The vehicle's engine hummed to life. Before she closed the door, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. Her silhouette was cut from shadow and rainwater. One more thing, Dylan, she said. The man at the diner. He's not the customer. He's just a handoff. The real collector is someone you used to know. Someone who also owes me a favor. When you see them, you'll understand why I chose you for this. And don't try to run. You know I'm faster. The door clicked shut. Dylan stood alone in the lamplight, the scent of cedar and rain mixing with the cold sweat on his brow. He walked to the door, opened it, and looked down. There, pressed between the rubber mat and the wet wood, was a small oilcloth pouch. Inside a key made of something that wasn't metal bone, maybe, or resin carved with the same labyrinth symbol as Salome's ring. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at his workbench, staring at the half-finished heron, his mind churning. He thought of Mara, who had died because of a different debt, a different favor called in too late. He thought of the fire, the heat on his face, the way Salome's grip had been the only solid thing in a world dissolving into smoke. He thought of the wooden birds, how they were meant to be innocent, how he had filled their hollow bodies with nothing but hope. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The sky cracked open, spilling pale gold light across the ridges. Dylan made coffee. He drank it black. Then he selected a piece of basswood, clean, fine-grained, and began to carve. He did not carve a mallard or a heron. He carved a raven, long beak, sharp, knowing eyes, wings folded tight, as if holding a secret. He worked with a speed and precision he hadn't felt in years, his hands remembering what his heart had tried to forget. The hollow in the belly he made small but deep, just large enough for a labyrinth key. As he sanded the final wing joint, he whispered to the empty cabin, one last flight. And outside, hidden among the dripping trees, a dark vehicle idled. Salome watched through a pair of antique field glasses. She saw the lamp come on. She saw the shadow of his hands moving across the workbench. She allowed herself the smallest, saddest smile. She had not told him everything. The man at the diner was indeed a handoff, but the collector was not an enemy. The collector was Mara's sister, a woman who believed Dylan had murdered her sibling to cover up a smuggling debt. The key opened a safety deposit box containing Mara's last letter, a confession that she had died of illness, not violence. The bird was not a weapon. It was an olive branch, and Salome was not a collector of debts. She was a collector of confessions. She had told Dylan the favor was simple. She had lied. The real favor was forcing him to face the one person he'd been running from longest, the truth about the past. And in that truth, there was a different kind of freedom, one that no amount of hiding could ever buy. The rain began again, soft this time, washing the ridge clean. Salome put down the field glasses, shifted the vehicle into gear, and vanished into the gray morning. Inside the cabin, Dylan Marsh finished the raven. He held it in his palms. It was beautiful and terrible, full of empty air and the weight of a promise. He tucked the bone key into its belly, sealed the hatch with wax, and painted the bird matte black with silver eyes. Tomorrow he would drive north, Tomorrow he would face his sister-in-law. Tomorrow the debt would be paid. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, he did not reach for the whiskey. He sat in the lamplight, holding the raven, and let the rain sing him into a dreamless sleep. The favor had come due. Dawn broke like a wound over Blackthorn Ridge, pale, reluctant, streaked with amber and gray. Dylan Marsh had not slept, but he was not tired. The adrenaline of the reckoning had burned away the fog of 6 years of half-life. He stood on his porch, the carved raven cradled in a felt-lined box, and watched the storm clouds tear apart on the eastern horizon. The key lay in the bird's hollow belly. The bird lay in the box. The box sat on the passenger seat of his rusted pickup truck, a vehicle that had not crossed the county line in 4 years. Dylan checked the oil, the tires, the faded map wedged behind the sun visor. He did not check his conscience. That was already packed. Before he turned the key in the ignition, he did one last thing. He walked back inside, opened the drawer of his workbench, and removed the photograph of Mara, his wife, his ghost, his great unhealed wound. He had kept it face down for 6 years because looking at her eyes made him feel like a fraud. She had trusted him. She had died believing he was a good man. He turned the photograph over. He looked at her face. Brown hair, laugh lines, a small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. She was smiling at someone off camera. Probably him. Probably a joke he had forgotten. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm going to finish it. For you." He tucked the photograph into his shirt pocket, over his heart, and left the cabin without looking back. The road north was a serpent of cracked asphalt winding through forests that had swallowed the old world. Dylan drove slowly, deliberately, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to memorize every mile. He had a feeling he would not see these trees again. Not because he would die. Salome had promised he would not, but because the man who returned to this cabin, if he returned at all, would not be the same man who was leaving it. The radio picked up only static. He drove in silence, the raven's glass eyes reflecting the dashlights. 3 hours later, the Rusty Spoon. It was everything its name promised. A chrome-sided diner from a forgotten decade, wedged between a tire shop and a vacant lot, its neon sign flickering, a desperate open in pink and blue. The parking lot held 3 vehicles, a sedan with a dented fender, a motorcycle covered in a tarp, and a black SUV with tinted windows that Dylan recognized immediately. Salome's shadow. She was here, watching. He parked at the far end of the lot, killed the engine, and sat for a long moment. The felt box sat on the passenger seat like a sleeping animal. He did not open it. He did not rehearse words. Salome had been explicit, set it on his table, say nothing, and walk away. But the second part of her warning gnawed at him. The real collector is someone you used to know. Someone who also owes me a favor. Someone he used to know. The phrase could mean a dozen ghosts. Dylan had burned many bridges in his smuggling days, and not all of them had been made of wood. He thought of crooked partners, betrayed allies, men and women. He had left in handcuffs or worse. But as he pushed open the diner's glass door and the little bell jingled overhead, the truth hit him like a shovel to the ribs. The man at the corner booth drinking black coffee from a chipped mug was not a stranger. He was Leo Vane. Leo was older, obviously gray at the temples, a scar across his jaw that hadn't been there 6 years ago, but the eyes were the same, sharp, calculating. The eyes of a man who had once been Dylan's best friend and in the same breath his most dangerous rival. They had run together in the borderlands, 2 wolves on the same leash. They had smuggled everything that could be smuggled, antiquities, medicines, information, and once, unbelievably, a rare butterfly thought to be extinct. Leo had been the brains. Dylan had been the hands. And then the fire at Port Rosso. Leo had been on the other side of that warehouse door. The one Dylan had locked. The one Leo had been pounding on when the ceiling collapsed. Dylan had told himself for 6 years that Leo had made it out. He had to believe that.